All right. First of all, I want to say thank you to Zapotepec, to Omeat, to the center, to Sister Janet, to everyone here. I am very grateful and honored to present the knowledge that I've acquired for the last 21 years. And that is what I want to share with you today. And it's from everything. It's from decolonization to liberation to what we can do in our daily lives to decolonize. But as part of my tradition that I started, I like to reclaim the space as Indigenous people. And as we know, we're here borrowing Tonga land and honoring our Tonga people. Part of that process is for us to create a pan-Indigenous awareness that we're all connected, that these borders do not define us, that colonialism does not define us. It defines an era of our history that will come and go. And in that honor, in that spirit, I would like to ask you if you can please honor me, and I'll be very grateful if you can join me in a collective poem. And this collective poem, I would ask that you please rise with me, if you can please take a stand. And this is a collective poem called Pledge of Resistance. And as a young little muchachita, I always questioned why we had to put our hand over our heart. I always felt that was very personal. I thought it was very intimate. And it didn't settle with me. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right in my heart. I didn't feel American. I didn't experience America the way I was being taught in school. And about maybe 5-6 years ago, I wrote this Pledge of Resistance. And I had youth read it with me. And it felt really, really empowering. It felt very healing. And so the way this works is I read the first line and you repeat after me. It's about a minute or two, so please bear with me. I am an original inhabitant of this land. I am not an illegal alien. I am not a foreigner on our land. I am indigenous. I am beautiful. I am brown. I am light brown. I am dark brown. I am beautiful. I have the right to be free. I have the right to be me. I have the right to walk on our continent. I love my people. I love myself. I love our future. This is our land. This is our continent. This is our land. This is our continent. The title of my presentation today is Reclaiming Our Power, Embracing Indigenous Identities, History, and Land, Dismantling White Supremacy and the Legacy of Conquest. Language matters, and we're going to unpack that. To start off, as a presentation is about reclaiming our power, reclaiming ourselves. The big process of that is about reclaiming our land, and I speak of that collectively. I speak of the tribal nations, I speak of the civilizations, right? Because we're talking about all of these categories that come through us through a very Eurocentric lens, a very European way of viewing populations, of viewing human migrations. And so it's important for us to reclaim who we are beyond what has been labeled America, beyond what has been labeled Mexico, and the countries in Central and South America. So for us to have that awareness, to have that consciousness, every day when we wake up, to acknowledge that you are on your land, the psychological effect that that has on our people is powerful, especially for our young ones. And it's important to include that and understand that all the borders that we see today are European. They came through a process of colonization and invasion and genocide. These are just some examples, because as we know, our heritage is rich. Our heritage is full of civilizations, tribes, nations. So the latest civilization that has been postmarked, we're looking at the KYR civilization, right? And that's part of the Tawantinsuyu nations that come so-called South America. And that's been dated 3000 to 2500 BC. And then up here in the so-called Gulf of Mexico, we're looking at the Olmec civilization. The last carbon dated has been actually matching 2500 to 400 BC, matching the Garal Supe civilization. So it's important for us to understand what this means to our diaspora, to our identity, to our continuing presence on these lands. So what we're looking at is an indigenous presence that created magnificent civilizations that overpass and bypass many of these concepts that are stolen from our traditions, from our knowledge, and from our contributions to the world. So it's important for us to place that and give it its proper honor in our history. And of course, we are surrounded with, right, a beautiful center that talks about the contributions of our ancestors, the accomplishments. We're looking at calendars, accurate calendars, mathematic concepts, the fact that we were the first people in the world to use the concept of zero, the 20 mathematic system of positional values, creators of the most accurate calendar, the first to have mandatory education for males and females. That's not a modern concept. That concept comes from our indigenous traditions. And this is very Mexica focused, but this same contribution can be found in other indigenous societies of the so-called Americas. One of the best books that I recommend if you're interested in learning more about the contributions is American Indian Contributions to the World. You can find it on Amazon. They should have it for, I think it's used prices like probably $10, $15. A great book, especially when you have children, especially if you're from the educational system like I am. It's important that we understand and appreciate the massive contributions that our ancestors gave the world that we still use to this very day. October 12, 1492. I want to talk about this very detailedly, and I want to introduce and I want to offer a new concept. In the studies that I've come across in my own decolonization journey, I'm always trying to see how to decentralize European narratives. How do we decentralize European concepts and points of reference? And what I am offering is that instead of us saying the Spanish conquest, instead of us saying European exploration, because both of these denote a very triumphant European, euphemistic expression of what took place on our continent on October 12, 1492. And this language matters because this language is being used in K-12 education systems at the university level. It's important for us to disrupt this narrative. It's important for us to dismantle where this comes from, right? And so what I am suggesting, what I offer to you is the concept of Akamana. Akamana in the Nahuatl language means disrupted, disturbed. Disruption. What I am offering is, instead of, like I said, calling it a conquest exploration, what really happened to our people in October 12, 1492, and from that point on, was a disruption of our humanity. It was a disruption of the rhythm of our creation, a disruption of the rhythm of our civilizations. And that's what I want to call it. And right now, I'm a grad student, and this is what I am presenting. And it hasn't been easy, because a lot of academics are very comfortable with Spanish conquest. They like the idea of European exploration, right? Because it reinforces white supremacy. It reinforces these ideas that we were just bound to be conquered. We were just bound to be invaded, right? And it also, we'll get into the arguments, but this is what I am offering. I want to search, and this is one language, one concept, but perhaps we can start renaming these things, right? This is a very traumatic date for our ancestors. And what I am offering is for us to say the Akamana. And what I envision is that our period right now of occupation will be considered or remembered as the Akamana. Our descendants in the near future, I am hoping and I am dreaming that they can wake up one day and not be occupied by these systems of white supremacy, and they can refer to this era of occupation, to this era of colonization, as the Akumana. The period of our history when we were disrupted. The period of our history where we were disturbed. Right? And so it's not only about replacing and changing these concepts, but it's about planting a vision that I am trying to be very intentional with the concept of Akumana. And sometimes when we're talking to people, this is my experience, I'm trying to explain, right? They say genocide. We're talking about genocide. I know about the Jewish genocide, I know about the Turks, I know about African slavery, but when we're talking about genocide, we don't talk about ourselves. We're not presented as the people that survived a genocide, right? And so I try to tell people, well, 95% of our entire population, and we're talking about the so-called Americas, right? Where we are using Anahuac, the one thing to you, 95% in general were wiped out, right? And so there are some areas that 100% of the population was wiped out, right? And so for us to even try to grasp that, the fact that there are people that existed in our communities that we don't even know of because they were exterminated 100%. And so what we're trying to say is we are the survivors, right? What makes us indigenous? What makes us part of this history, of the civilization, is the fact that we come from this experience, right? And so what we're saying is the population, overall, continental, in 1491, that's us, right? The indigenous population. We're going to get into the genocidal process. 95% of our populations were killed through biological warfare, violence, slavery, starvation. The list keeps going, right? Really important, notice the use of biological warfare. To this day, historians, biochemists, scientists will deny that how they killed our people, that it wasn't intentional. No, they didn't know what they were doing. The Indians just died, right? We're studying stuff. I come across things that say the Great Indian Decline, right? We just declined, right? Europeans came and no morimos, right? That's not the way it works. When you describe a massive death like that, you are disassociating your accountability to that genocide, right? So they rather believe that there was these independent Germans that just traveled and killed our people, and the Europeans were just standing there and we were just dying. That's not the way it worked. Europeans themselves used biological warfare against each other in Europe. Right? So how do you go from using biological warfare in your homeland, and all of a sudden you're here on our land, and all of a sudden you don't know what you're doing? Right? We don't buy that. So it's really important for us to understand that the language, what has been described as the coming of two peoples, right, the great exploration, was very intentional. It was very biological warfare, violence, enslavement, starvation. Right? Those of us that survived this, 5% of us, the survivors, what happened to those survivors after you survived this massive trauma? We're enslaved, right? We're forced into Catholic and Christian conversions, and this was systemic. And let me focus a point here, right? When I first started my decolonization journey, I was very dogmatic. I was like, why are my people Christian? Why are they Catholic? Don't they get it? That's a white man's religion, right? And then I started studying. I started studying the ways the Spanish Crown and other Europeans, the way they would terrorize our communities, the way they would persecute, go door to door, right? And if you were practicing anything even relevant to indigenous traditions, you were taken out in a public space and you were executed, right? So imagine our people, once you survive this violent wave of genocide, and now being told that what you believe in doesn't matter. That who you are can only exist within these boundaries. And being killed, massacred, executed for practicing what you remember of your traditions, what you remember of your ancestors' ways, that does a damage, right? It's psychologically damaging And now that I'm older, about 20 years later, I'm understanding the trauma. I'm understanding the psychological impact that that has on our community, on our people. And to me, I like to believe now that I'm more compassionate. I like to believe now that I'm more understanding of that, because I now am understanding just how devastating that process was. And we get into, obviously, forced conversions, Spanish culture, branded colonial identities, which we're going to impact, and then national identities, right? Once they dismantled, destroyed whatever indigenous foundations we had, and they started distributing land among themselves, because we weren't in control, right? They divide, chop up, and we have Mexico, and we have El Salvador, and we have Guatemala. So in my research, I am finding and I'm connecting this. Again, this is something new to me, because I used to be very, I'm Mexican, and the Mexican flag, because that's what it was to be Mexican, right? But in learning this and understanding this history, I'm realizing, man, even that is a product of this genocidal process. So I'm saying nationalism was created as a system to organize, colonize lands, and claim colonized people as legitimate subjects. And that is what I'm learning. And as we're trying to create a pan-indigenous unity among Mexicans, Salvadoreños, Guatemaltecos, it's important for us to understand that. Because when we're divided and we're fighting each other because yo soy de Salvador, tú eres de Guatemala, de Nicaragua, what we're doing, ignorantly, is reinforcing the divisions that came out of the system of colonization. And it was very systemic. It wasn't something that was very easy. No, it's very systemic, very intentional, and it wasn't about us. So what we're talking about is denied genocide. These are some of the books, and I'm glad to see American Holocaust is one of the books that they recommend here. Another new book that I would greatly recommend is The Other Slavery. This one just came out a few years ago. This is the very first time an actual historian argues and says there was another slavery, right? We've been talked about slavery. We've been introduced that concept as primarily an African experience, which it was an African experience. But along the same time, and this book argues that, is that the slavery of our people was parallel. It existed at the same time. It was practiced at the same time as African slavery. But because it wasn't in the same system of slavery that it was under African population, it was different. What he finds is that the majority of the slaves in this other slavery were women, right? We have domesticated indigenous women participating and being forced into the system. We're looking at mines where our men were enslaved in the mines. Who's left? The women. Who's taken? The women. So he draws that connection. And these are just examples of some of the drawings. And when people talk about this, they're like, what are you talking about? It wasn't that bad. It happened a long time ago. It doesn't, that's the human history. That's what happens in the globe. And I'm like, no, this is not a rite of passage of being human. This is a very specific tactic, a very specific practice of European culture. I am not going to allow European culture to be the gauge of my humanity, right? That's not what we're going to allow. This is not normal. They've normalized it. They want us to think, oh, it's normal, it just happened, African slavery. If it wasn't for us, if it wasn't for slavery, you wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for, and again, that mentality is very, very toxic, right? And it comes from a very damaged psychological reaction to what has happened. And we don't got it before. A lot of these writings were written by Europeans themselves. Why don't we know this? Why aren't we taught this in history? Well, it's not just about what's happening in Texas today, where they're banning indigenous people's history, the real history of the United States. It goes way further than that. Indigenous knowledge, knowing who we are, was a threat to the systems of white supremacy, and that is why, this is one example. In 1577, King Philip II, he wrote a decree banning indigenous knowledge. So this was an actual government document saying indigenous people cannot know their way of life. You must destroy, you must burn, you must make sure that you erase anything having to do with this culture, right? So the roots of us not knowing our history and these institutions of white power comes from a very, very specific intentional use. A lot of people are always like, oh, that's what you think happened. You know, that's what you're imagining. You know, and I'm like, no, it's right there, right? The documents are there. It's written by them. We just gotta read it and expose it. Like, this is what happened. I'm not imagining things. I'm not, you know, I don't know, having illusions. This is really what went down. And let's talk about it. Part of my research connected me with this man. This is Nican. He's the Polish Jew that coined the concept of genocide, right? He's the one that pushed for it to be, this is before he even knew how many Jews had been killed in the, what is called Holocaust. He was an actual victim of that process. But when he actually positioned for this, when he actually did the research to describe what was happening, he didn't know the massive amount of Jews that had been killed. But for him, it was enough for him to say, you know what? Someone has to be accountable. There has to be something that we can create that describes exactly how drastic, how dramatic, how disgusting this whole system is. And he came up with the concept of genocide. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, well, why doesn't this apply to us? Genocide. The planned annihilation of a national or racial group by a variety of actions aimed at undermining the foundations essential to the survival of the group as a group, right? So I'm reading this, I'm like, okay. Then I start studying his own studies. This is what blew my mind. Nican, in coming across and putting together this concept and describing to the United Nations, what does he mean by genocide? Well, he has a lot of unpublished work because he died very young. There was a lot of unpublished work that he left behind, in which he studied the indigenous populations of North America, the Inca, the Mexica, and he was writing about how indigenous people were treated under Spanish and other Iberian cultures, and that's what he was using as examples of genocide, right? So isn't that crazy, isn't that wild, that the man who coined the concept of genocide is using us as an example of what he means by genocide as he's talking about the Jews, but yet today this concept is far away from describing our experience as indigenous people. Now this blew my mind. I'm sure I'm not the first person to know this. I'm sure I'm not. But the fact that this whole concept is especially excluded, we're excluded from this experience. We're excluded from identifying with this concept, right? And we're talking about, in genocide, he has 4 concepts, and he has examples of it. What I want to share is, obviously we already know that we are the people being defined by genocide, but if we're trying to be specific about it, in his concept of genocide, his definition of genocide, A, it's killing members of the group. Obviously, that happened to us. That happened to all of our people of the Western Hemisphere. Then we have B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. We're talking about that. We're talking about the psychological impact of genocide and colonization. We're having C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. And I have recent examples of this. Right? This is our people that were coming during the Bracero program who were sprayed down with pesticides, right? Who suffer cancer to this day. The survivors of this, a lot of them are afflicted with this disease. And ultimately, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. I invite you to watch this documentary, No Más de This. This is about the forced sterilization of our women in East LA in the 70s. This is happening to this day. This is not just what happened 500 years ago. These systems continue to this day. And so a little bit more about nationalism, right? It's important for us to understand that these nations that came across our land, they don't define our power, they don't define our presence, they define the Europeans who never left our land, right? Mexico, it's not governed by Mexicans, it's criollos. Criollos never left Mexico. El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. The power structure, the racial makeup of that power structure is still European. So they're telling us, oh, vete pa Mexico, that's your land, Mexico's tu país. No. Everywhere we go, we're still being governed by that racial makeup of white power, of white supremacy. And we already know this, right? You already know about these concepts. Hispanic, banning the Spanish because we speak Spanish, after being forced to speak Spanish or being banned, our identity. Latin, we're not Latin, we're not Romans. Even if you put Latin X, that's just Roman X, right? We don't even speak Latin, right? Spanish is a long derivative of the Latin, but we're not speaking Latin. And obviously marketing, we're the biggest population that make up the whole Latino Hispanic category. And that's intentional. It's a marketing scheme. They want to target one group, hit all of us in one punch, and get our money. And make it seem that indigenous people are not here anymore. Mario Luis Kritzenberger, Don Francisco, right? Why didn't they say Don Kritzenberger, right? That doesn't flow. How much time do I have? 20? So, right, so all these things are like, wait a second, it's making sense. Why are we forced into these categories? And what we're looking at is power is an identity. Identity is power, right? We're being forced to identify with Hispanic, Spain, with Latinos, the Roman Empire, as indigenous people on this land. And that's very intentional. Imagine we wake up tomorrow and all of us are like, we're not Hispanic, Latino, this is our land. Telemundo, bye. Univision, bye. All these government agencies that are trying to manipulate and exploit our community, they don't want to survive, right? So they're trying to exploit our demographics by making it seem that, oh, you know, Hispanic, Latino, it's innocent, you speak Spanish. I'm like, well, honestly, the majority of the time I speak English. So does that mean that I'm Britannic? And does that mean that all non-white people who speak English are Britannic? So does that mean that Malcolm X was Britannic, right? Asada Shakur is Britannic. It's not, right? But the fact is that they are labeling an indigenous population that is on their own land, right? That we are resilient because we have survived all of this. And now they want us to identify with these colonial labels. Very importantly, this one is really, really, really important. The biggest farce of Mexico, Central America, is this concept of mestizo, right? Why is it that we are supposed to become a new race after being occupied and terrorized? How does that make us new people? Why did that make others a new people? Other people have been occupied, other people have gotten their freedom, but why is it that when it comes to indigenous populations, why is it that all of a sudden, wait, you're a new race? You know, you're not indigenous, you're mixed blood, you can't claim all that Indian stuff. And it's like, it has to do with this. We are here, right? So long as they keep our minds identifying with Europe and Cristina and all them, we're not going to acknowledge, oh, this is mine. Yeah, I may be paying rent to Doña Lola. Yeah, I might be paying gas bill, light bill, but ultimately, the essence of who we are is here. We don't have to go anywhere. Right? And this concept of mestizaje, I invite you, please read Raza Cósmica. Please. It's short, it's 120 pages. Yep. Please read it. This man is a criollo, right? After the Mexican Revolution, he wrote this essay. He was fantasizing about the new Mexican identity, right? What are we going to be called after this Mexican Revolution? It's a little too Indian. In his book, Raza Cósmica, this man is a eugenist. This man is talking about controlling indigenous populations, making sure we don't get too brown, making sure that we continue this whiteness. Like, yeah, you know, we're a new race, right? La raza cósmica, a cosmic race. But you better speak Spanish, but you better continue practicing Spanish in European religions, right? But you better not get too dark, but you better not marry too dark because no vamos a mejorar la raza, right? Have you heard that before? Mejorar la raza, right? So the Mexican national government actually paid this man to create these concepts. And so this whole concept of mestizaje, la raza cósmica, this is a Indigenous project. You haven't heard of that? I didn't know about this. You read this stuff. And I'm like, man, this is the most racist stuff I've read in this era of Mexico. Why is it glamorized? Why is it celebrated? And that is raza. And I made a poster recently, and people are like, raza, why is that bad? And I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna make a video about that. But this is why. And this is not to blame our people from the Chicano movement. This is not to blame our warriors from the 60s and 70s. This is what they knew, right? Us, if we were there at that time marching down East LA, we would be doing the same thing. But as we're growing, as we're developing our knowledge, as we continue our decolonization journey, these things become exposed. And obviously, genocide, right? The media, the demonizing. We all know these figures, right? Doña Maria, beautiful woman, beautiful indigenous woman, mocked, right? Mocked by a lot of white royal Mexicans. La Escuelita, I grew up watching this stuff. La Escuelita, this woman, she actually has a bone in her head. If you don't even see it, she has a bone. And she's wearing a beautiful huipil. And this is our own people, Gustavo Arellano. He was using this cartoon. He doesn't have his own. But ask a Mexican, this is what he's using? This is the type of portrayal he wants to give himself? Wow. Right? And then we have Doña Chupitos, drunk, molacha. And these are all beautiful women. Beautiful women. And then this is actually years ago. I want to say 2005, 2006, when the actual Minutemen came up and all that. There was actual game, right? This is a screenshot of a game where you gain points by killing people crossing the border, right? I don't know if it was mass produced. The thing is, it was out there. You paid for it. You got to kill our people. So we're looking at this 2005, and what just happened? What just happened to our sister? Shot in the head, right? Shot for running away from the terrorist police, right? The occupying forces, ICE, right? I don't know. Whew. 7 years old. Got neglected, right? Throwing up in her own vomit, right? So this is real. This is real. We're talking about this genocide, this racism. It's killing us, right? And when, like I say in my poem, we're light brown, we're dark brown, right? And a lot of our dark, full-blooded people that are coming to their land, they're migrating their own land. This is what's happening. I'm gonna watch one of those novelas. We already know that, right? Novelas. And so when we're looking at, again, population, we talked about that. We're the majority of the so-called Hispanic, we're the majority of the so-called Latino, but yet we're told to surrender our indigenousness, our diverse indigenous identities to this umbrella of this marketing system, right? That sees us as, los son indios, pero hablan español. So what do we do with this? What do we do? How do we change this? How do we fight this? And what we suggest, what we're here to say, is that we're not colonial products. We're vibrant. We're resilient, beautiful, indigenous people. We are here gathered in spaces like this, right? To honor, to cherish, to embrace our many indigenous identities, our many indigenous histories. And one that I would suggest, and again, this is one, there's many ways that our people identify, as you see in this image, many ways, right? The way that I am offering, the way that I'm suggesting, the way that I feel comfortable with is Nican Tlaca. Nican Tlaca comes Nican Tlaca or Nican Tlaca. They're both correct. This is just one alternative. Let's find more. Let's find more of our indigenous languages. One thing I want to make clear, this whole idea of being pan-indigenous, we didn't have that concept prior to 1492 and European terrorism, right? We didn't need it. We weren't attacked by this entire system. So if we're choosing it, we have to identify and group together and to fight for our humanity, we have to start somewhere. Let's find our languages. Let's reclaim our languages. And that's just some of the activities, some of the actions that I participated in. And I want to invite you to continue doing the work, to continue coming to the spaces. If you have your children, to continue teaching them this. So they don't grow up the way we had to grow up. They didn't grow up doubting their beauty, doubting their intelligence. You know, that's not humane. We want to teach our children to be brave warriors. These are, I will leave you with this, recommended books. And like I say here, we all start somewhere. You know, it's not easy. It's not like a black and white thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, maruchan, ya estás, pop up, we're good. No, it's a process, right? And when we're talking about decolonization, we're being colonized every day. So the process of decolonization, it's not going to stop. You don't graduate from decolonizing school like, oh, you're good now. Because every day, these systems are working to colonize us, are working to rob us of our power, of our identity, of who we are. These are some of the books I recommend. Like I said, American Indian Contributions to the World, American Holocaust, British Slavery, The Daily Life. Few. These are very few. There's a lot more, but these are just some of the ones that are the most important. I think that can help. And just want to share with you guys that this knowledge, this message, our people want to hear it. Our people want to learn more about it. I am very proud to tell you that my book, Obsidian Blades, is being used at Citlalli and Golden West College. I published this. No one published this, me. I self-published this. So what does this tell you? That things are starting to change. That people are starting to be more open-minded about this. The book over there, I wrote that when I was 16, right? When I first started learning my history, waking up, and I told myself, one day I wish, I hope, I dream I can write a poetry book where someone like me can understand this, right? Can make it easier for them to understand. And that's what I've been trying to do. I'm trying to bring this knowledge, I'm trying to share this information in a way that I wish would have been presented to me when I was a youngster. With that, gracias, Martín.